Welcome to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes Ministries. Thank you for listening. Janet will be talking about her struggle with addiction, alcohol, drugs, eating disorders, unwanted same-sex attraction, and living a homosexual life. Janet has survived all those things by the grace of God. Janet's not a doctor, she's not a therapist, she's not a psychotherapist, she's not a licensed counselor. Janet is an ordained pastor and wants to show you God's promises, how God has set her free, and how you can be set free. What He has done for her, He will do it for you. If healing and freedom are what you want, you have come to the right place at the right time. Let's get started. Here is Janet Boynes.
I have a special guest that I'm looking forward to interviewing because of the trauma that you went through. You know, some of the trauma that many of my listeners will be listening to or watching on YouTube. Dr. Simm, thank you for being on Healing and Made Free, Janet Boynes.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's one of the hardest, but one of my most loved topics. So, let's dive in.
Yeah, it was funny. I was interviewing, well, not funny, somebody earlier, and I was watching their facial expression as they talk about the things they went through as a child and their mom being an alcoholic and leaving them in a car. And I could just see just bringing all that back sort of struck a nerve. You could just see the pain in his face that sometimes we can overload ourselves with so much work. We don't deal with what's really going on inside of us, and it can come out in other ways. However, I want to get into just about your doctorate. You have a doctorate degree. What made you go on in life and become a doctor?
Well, I have to say it's a God thing. I graduated high school barely. I am dyslexic. I have dyslexia. And I wasn't diagnosed until I went to a community college English class, which I actually had to cancel, drop out of because I couldn't complete it. And the teacher there was really kind and said, I know you are very intelligent, but I think you may have a learning disability. And she mentioned dyslexia, and all I knew of it at the time was you were supposed to see things upside down or backwards, which can be a symptom. However, I did not have that. So anyway, but God really made sure I was in that class because I met my future husband in that class. So even though I dropped out, I was later diagnosed with dyslexia. And then from that point, my love of learning, school had always been my safe place. And so I was able to continue learning. I got my degree in psychology, my undergrad. I followed that up with a master's in education, focused specifically on adult learning, training, and development. And then I just felt like, a calling to go, okay, you're almost there. Just go ahead and do it. And the funds, my husband and I were came from poor families. So we had to borrow everything, but I made it through the doctorate, and it's in educational leadership and change. And so it's just one step of faith and one class at a time, one paper at a time.
I just met you not even 6 months ago, probably 3 months ago, and just really fell in love with your personality, just talking with you, and knew that it was just like a divine connection. And there's like something in our conversation, just I wanted more of my time with you and talk with you a little more. And I was like, why don't you be on my podcast? So reaching out to you, but you mentioned your husband. So obviously you have a family. Talk a little bit about your family.
Well, as I said, I met my husband, Madison, in that English class, and I did drop out. But again, God is good. I happened to walk into a coffee shop. This was pre-Starbucks, and his parents owned it. And lo and behold, there was this cute guy behind the counter. Anyway, so Madison and I have been together for 33 years now, and we have two daughters. We have an older daughter, Mackenzie, at 26, and our youngest, Alexandra, is 23.
Are they following in your footsteps to become a doctor?
Well, funny enough, yes. Actually, when I met Madison, he was going to be the doctor. He wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon, but he got into finance, which is totally, different than what he had planned. And I had no aspirations to finish college. So, God has His will. Mackenzie's actually going to be a nurse practitioner and get her doctorate in nursing. And Alexandra is working on her master's in art history and is hoping to get to move forward in a PhD as well. She's an academic like me, so but Mackenzie is all of that science that Madison was. So yeah, kind of weird, but it's we're just excited for them and what God has planned for them, and if they do that, great. If they don't, we love them anyway. So, but
Exactly.
yeah,
Well,
so they're really
God made them on purpose for a purpose and look like they are stepping into their purpose. And that's always a blessing for me, not being a parent, many spiritual kids, but for a parent to see their children going on and educating themselves so they can be helpful to society. Because God knows we need those millennials and Gen Zs for sure
yes, we do.
to step in. I want to get into talking a little bit about growing up. I know that you're a survivor of sexual trauma. Talk a little bit about your childhood and what happened to you.
Well, short version is my parents were young teenagers, and my father Ernie and my mother Louise had three of us before my mom was 21, and then divorced. It was very turbulent, very abusive. There was a lot of alcohol, drugs, infidelity, all of that. So they broke up and finally divorced. I was about three-ish at the time. My mom remarried about a year and a half later to my dad, who legally adopted the three of us. So we no longer even saw our biological father. But again, another alcoholic. And obviously my mother didn't know at the time, somebody struggling with sexual trauma. My dad was sexually abused at the early age of 9 by an uncle and then by other individuals. But that caused a cycle of abuse and add drugs and alcohol to it. And again, at the age of, I think I was 8, almost 9, I was sexually abused by him until I was about 14 and a half. And then the walls just closed in on our family, and my dad went to jail. What was what was in hindsight wonderful was he took full responsibility for everything. I never had to testify. There was no trial. He pled guilty, um, and then started his own healing in jail. Created a group of other men that were there for the same reason. And our neighbor, couple doors down, happened to find my dad in jail with him and join the group as well. So, I mean, it was quite pivotal. But I think what was the best thing was my mom found an amazing therapist. And she, unbeknownst to me, I mean, we had gone to church, but we weren't church following. Obviously, we were in the pews, but we weren't a family. My parents would have the kids go off to church, and they had a break from the kids. But yeah, this woman that we met, wore a cross. I didn't think anything of it. But the way she handled the healing, not only for me, but she worked with my mother, she worked with my father, she worked with my siblings, and she is still part of our life to this day. It can only be God's divine intervention, and so one step after another, our family began to heal in such a way that's, uh, as my young daughter said, early on, it had to have been divine intervention because it seemed so improbable and impossible to heal from sexual trauma like that. But the restoration that God did is amazing. So it sounds easy, but that's let's see. By the time I forgave my dad,
Hey, Dr.
I
Sim,
was
before you go into talking about forgiveness,
Mhm.
you know, I want to ask the question, and you don't have to answer it, out of protecting your other families. But in my family, when I was sexually assaulted by my mother's husband, being raised in a family of 7 kids, 4 different fathers, I didn't find out until 15 years after I told my mother, who didn't believe me, that my younger sister was sexually assaulted or raped by the same man, which was uh, my mom's husband, who she never even divorced from all the way up until her death, even though, he was a different father, never raped his other biological child, but raped us. And me and my sister, and we weren't even his kids. Did that happen with your other siblings?
The research that we did when it came out in our family was we did go and talk to not only my brother and my sisters. I have a stepsister, um, but also our cousins because they lived with us, and were close to us. There was a lot of inappropriateness with the kids. Obviously, we're being taught, and we're so there was some incest going on, but there wasn't any more molestation from my dad. So that, but it's not unheard of because, like you said, when you have a stepfather, or in my case, my dad, he legally adopted us, so he's not my stepdad. Um, it can happen that way, but no, neither my cousin, male or female, or siblings were sexually abused except for myself, which
Yeah.
I think kind of made it a little harder in some aspects. Um, but yeah, no, it was really, really flushed out in our family. So
I'm so glad that, even at the age of 14, that one, he went to jail, and two, you were able to get the professional help that you needed so you can heal, which is a process. Because I just got back from Uganda and I spoke 6 times, and I had an opportunity to not only talk with some youth from 15 down to the age of 5, but also at a youth church group meeting. And by the time I was done, God be my witness, I think every woman in the place just lost it. They were crying, and that was a it broke my heart because I knew they went through what I went through. They went through what you went through and really had nobody to tell. There's so many people, Dr. Sim, that is suffering in silence. From the age of it, you being going through what you went through with your father who adopted you, how were you able to maintain going to school and keeping it a secret? Were you threatened? Because there are people that are going to be watching this who are going through what you already went through and afraid to speak up. What made you remain silent, until it all came out?
well, of course, there's coercion. That's the number one thing. But coercion can be obviously very violent, very scary. But in my case, coercion was very soft. I love you and you're special. And, mom knows and everything's okay. And um, so it wasn't as if I knew that what was happening was wrong. I didn't. I just knew in my person that I didn't like it. Funny enough, it wasn't until I was, my older siblings got out at school a little bit later than I did. And so being the middle one, came home, and there was these things on ABC, the after school special, and I was watching it, and there was a show called Something About Amelia, and Glenn Close, Ted Danson shared sexual trauma in a way, and sexual abuse in a way on public television. And I watched it, and it was at that moment that I knew exactly what was happening because I did not know it was wrong. I did not know. I didn't. No one had communicated to me. Nobody had discussed with me, appropriate behavior, not appropriate behavior. It just wasn't talked about. Like you're saying, so many women for so many generations, we just keep things silent, and we don't talk about these things. Obviously, my father, my dad, Bob, he never told about what happened to his uncle, and what caused him to be abusive as well in that way. And I think that is that is the pivotal thing, is that silence has to be broken, whether you're a male and experiencing this, or a female. I think that's the most pivotal thing.
Speaking out is a scary thing for children like us who have been through, sexual abuse, because of you're going to get in trouble or you're going to get blamed for it, and they're not going to blame me because they're going to believe the adult. And there's young kids that are out there listening, and parents that are listening feeling, I went through that and I haven't spoke up, and how do I go about healing? If there's somebody that is watching via YouTube or on a podcast channel wanting to get help, what does that process look like?
Well, the hardest thing is, and I've noticed in my private practice, a lot of the women, they go and share it with their mothers who probably have been sexually abused as well. And it's one of those, it's kind of the way of life, suck it up kind of, or they don't believe them, which happens unfortunately a lot. There's multiple facets that are reasoning behind that. However, if you are aware of what is happening to you, there's so many outlets that you can talk to past your parents. You can try to talk to others in the family if you're close to someone. And by the way, there are individuals that are what we call must reporters, and that includes any school official, any nurse or doctor's office, any police station, or things like that. But there also are, sexual trauma hotlines. There's, websites you can go to. There's a lot of ways, especially with technology. I mean, if somebody reached out to you or I, we'd be able to, then, help them out, guide them into who they should contact in their area, that kind of thing. There's so many ways. So if your parent won't listen to you or doesn't believe you, there are other ways to get it out.
And pastors are others that they can go to and talk with that have to report. We are reporters as well. I know here in the Assemblies of God, we are reporters as well. And it's sad you said that a lot of children aren't believed. I was one of those children that wasn't believed at the age of 21 when I finally decided to speak up. So we know there's many men and women that are suffering in silence. And I'm having you on the show because I don't want them to suffer in silence. I want them to feel like I can go talk with someone, and we'll put your practice up, as we're airing this. So if someone wants to reach out to you or have you come speak, to a youth group or something like that, that they are able to reach out to you, or they could reach out to Janet Boynes Ministries. When we go through this type of trauma or any trauma, there's a word called forgiveness. And all the way up until my mom's husband, who she wasn't with, all her life, she just never decided to divorce him. I had a hard time forgiving that man. Once I knew he did it to me, when I found out it happened to another sibling, man, I'm not kidding. But if I had a 9mm, I think I would have used it back then because I was not all in my right mind, coming out of homosexuality and just angry anyway, I think I'd be in jail today. Thank God that I'm not. But how does someone begin to forgive somebody that violated them?
Well, there are a lot of steps to becoming. See, at first, when it happens to us, we're a victim. And then once we can, have our own autonomy and our own control, we then become survivors. but we're not necessarily thriving. And so that's where I like to really work with women in my private practice, is to help them deal with their emotions. God gave us an enormous amount and a huge spectrum of emotions, anger, fear, hurt, pain, joy, patience, kindness, love, and forgiveness. And so how can we get from one to another? It requires effort. It requires dealing with them in a way that is respectful and yet not ruminating on the past, because that's one thing a lot of women want to do. Unfortunately, is like they talk about it and talk about it and talk about it, and it's like you need to talk about it with a purpose. In order to understand what was going on, you need to talk about it to recognize things that weren't your fault or outside of your control. And you need to, talk about it in order to deal with the emotions that are going on during those times. But to ruminate, to continue to talk about it, will only keep you trapped in there. And that's where forgiveness starts to pull you out. It is that type of forgiveness that is not only critical from a therapeutical point of view, which is what I happen to have done my master's on, forgiveness as a therapeutical technique. But it's also a biblical thing. I mean, Christ wants what's best for us. And so he asks us and commands us to forgive one another. And then once, as we are forgiven, as in 2 Corinthians 5:17 talks about, we're transformed and we're made new in Christ. We are then asked to go out and create a ministry of reconciliation and forgiveness. Mm-hmm. Now, that seems easier said than done, but it's not really, because if you think about it, I mean, God really wants what's best for us. And they talk about unforgiveness is like, having poison that you're drinking, hoping the other person's going to die. Mm-hmm. But forgiveness sets you free of that. Forgiveness says it is not for me to judge that person. That is for God to do. That is for society or the criminal justice system, whatever that is. But it's not on me. My job is to let it go. My job is to realize that I am okay over here and I can be stronger over here. And what can I do for Christ? I love working with women to help them find the blessings in their sexual trauma. And I know there's going to be a lot of people out there going, "Excuse me, Dr. Lynnette, blessings?
Yes,
what the heck
they
are you talking about?" And you know what? But here are the blessings. I have two amazing, beautiful girls. And because I was able to get help when I did, and because I was able to walk and heal and then see what was going on and to communicate with them and then talk to them about sex, something that was not talked to me about, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, when should you, when shouldn't you, who can touch you, when, where, who are safe people. Just talk. Sex isn't a bad word. God created it. He created it with a purpose. He created it for connection. He created it for glory. So if we stop trying to hide it, then we can share it in such a way that, in my blessing, I now have two young women who have not had sexual trauma. Mm-hmm. And they haven't had sexual trauma because I had it and I communicated it.
Okay. And I think that's part of the problem, is that a lot of parents don't know how, like my mom never communicated about sex. The only thing she said, if you get pregnant, I'm putting your little butt away. And that's it, now that, your menstrual cycle's on and you have to do this. However, there aren't a lot of women out there that can say, yeah, Dr. Sims, you might have forgave. I know I'm a victim, but it's a process when people decide to get to that place of saying, I'm ready to forgive. It doesn't mean that they can't excel in life, but it does hold them back.
It does. It does. I worked with an amazing pastor, Pastor James Seal, and we talked about forgiveness. It's not when you're ready. Because it's kind of like, when are you ready to have children? Okay, when you're a millionaire, when you have nannies, when you have, all the time in the world, there is no ready for life. You are never going to be ready to forgive. Okay, forgiveness isn't your choice. It's God's command. And so once you are forgiven, it is your job to forgive. Well, what does that mean? Well, first, just say it. Just start by saying the words, I forgive Bob. You don't need to talk to Bob. You don't need to be friends with Bob. You don't need to do anything, but you just need to say it. Okay. You can say things like, "Dear Lord, help me forgive Bob."
Mhm.
Okay. Help me forgive. And every day you continue that until God changes your heart, because it wasn't me, because I lived many years in bitterness and in hatred and in self-sabotage and spiraling, all of the things, until I walked in Christ, until I literally started to see that God had forgiven me. And Lynnette, Dr. Lynnette Simm, I've committed, I've broken every commandment,
Mhm.
every single one of them. And I have no place to judge another.
Mhm.
So once I recognize that I'm a sinner and that my sin is no greater or less than anyone else's, that's when God put in that 2 Corinthians 5:18, which is how I sign all of my books, is now that you are made in Christ and you have been reconciled, it is your job, it is your command to go out there and do it. It is not easy. It took over a decade to get to a point where I could hug my dad, because my parents didn't divorce either.
Mhm.
And they stayed married and lived together until they both passed. So, but there came a point when I did hug this man
Mhm.
in such a way that I recognized the broken boy that he was, that happened to him, and how that caused his behavior, and was able to show compassion to that young boy and get to know that older man who had changed his life, who walked with Christ, who, asked for and received forgiveness from our entire family. Now, there are individuals that are not going to do that,
Mhm.
and that's okay. But your job isn't to make them remorseful. It is your job to forgive them so that they don't have a tie and a hold on you, so that the enemy doesn't have a tie and a hold on you. So I suggest the very first thing is to pray. Dear Lord, please help me forgive, and just say it.
Mhm.
God is, it's called the Word because it is what we read. It is what He plants on our heart, and it is powerful. So
And it doesn't mean that just because you ask for forgiveness that it didn't happen to you. Forgiveness doesn't free the other person, but it frees you.
absolutely.
And
Just
it
remember,
might,
forgiveness from Christ is His gift to you. It's not to them.
right. Forgive them for they know not what they do. And a lot of people don't forgive, and the person that hurt them has moved on with their life. They're not thinking about it. And here you're still trapped in these chains and angry and frustrated, when you can just say, God, I'm going to say the word forgive. I said this, God, I'm going to say the word forgiveness, but you know me, I don't mean it in my heart. So you're going to have to help me get it down to my heart, because if you don't help me, it's not going to get there, because I will literally hate this man and blast him until he goes off to hell if he doesn't repent. But God gave me the heart and softened my heart that I forgave all men, because I hated men. It was
Mhm.
like, if you did it to me and if you did it to my sister, how many other men are out there doing it? And then you hear about it happening all over the world, that women and now our little boys are being raped and molested and taken advantage of. I mean, Satan is just on the war path. However, you don't know what you don't know. I forgave my mom for not forgiving me because she didn't know. My mom didn't have the tools to do anything. She didn't have the counseling. I know my grandmom very well. She wasn't educated. And so once my mom said I was sorry, I was able to forgive her and not hold her accountable for what she didn't know.
Mhm.
No, but I was able to have the best relationship with her before she died. You said something that I think is really important, is that same with Joyce Myers. She was able to lead her father, to the Lord, baptize him. And people are like, well, I wouldn't have did that. How was that for you? Number one, I can hear my listeners thinking, why would your mother stay with him after what he did to her child? What keeps a mom or even a dad in a relationship with someone who molested their child? Have you ever thought about that?
I not only thought about it, but I spoke to my parents multiple times about it. For my parents, their reasoning was they felt that the destruction of our family would weigh even more on me. I am a very empathetic individual, and I felt at the time, with all of the turmoil that was going on, that it was my fault that the family was in such turmoil, that it was my fault that Dad was in jail, that we were barely had food on the table, and it was my so they had that in their background, but also I know that in the time that my dad was in jail and my mom would go and talk to him, she learned more about him and about his trauma and about his pain, and was able to have something that I didn't have at the time, and that is called compassion. To understand that those that he wasn't taught that it was right or wrong. Nobody explained to him that what his uncle did to him at that time was wrong. Nobody sheltered him. Nobody believed him. Nobody talked to him. And so he dealt with it with alcoholism and the cycle, and which is a lot that happens when it comes to that type of molest. It's a cycle that has to be broken. And I also think that my mother stayed with my dad because he did accept responsibility. And it did mean jail time. And it did mean, being labeled, a sex offender, and all of the things. But he took that on because he did it and he accepted that responsibility. And I don't think if he hadn't, our family and their marriage would have survived. Now, that being said, I was very angry that she chose him over me. And that's how I saw it at that point. Because again, I wasn't open to hearing or showing compassion at the time. I didn't have compassion for myself, let alone for anyone else. And again, it wasn't until, I stepped into Christ in such a way that he opened my eyes as to what real strength is. I felt as a young girl who was bullied for how I looked, was bullied for my size, my learning disability, just everything that that I wasn't, of any value. And so I would pray, to whatever. I didn't even know God could provide this, but I asked for strength so I could be strong, so that I could protect myself. And God answered me, but he didn't answer me, with big muscles or, a sharp tongue. He answered me with compassion, and the ability to see other broken people. And once that happened, I was able to see my dad, Bob, in such a way that it was heartbreaking. I saw a photo of this young boy. I was doing his birthday when he turned 70, and did, pictures and whatnot. And I saw him at 8 and 9 years old when his uncle molested him. He was just the cutest boy ever. And it's that part. And I even get choked up thinking about it, because it's that part that started the hurt in our family. But it's that compassion also that allowed me to love my dad in such a way, as not only a survivor like me, but also to see the hurt that he caused and the grief that he felt for that. So yeah, I mean, I think it's the compassion part. It's for us to try to see that,
Hurt people hurt people.
It's not a cliche.
It's not a cliche, not at all.
Because I'm a happy, loved person, and I'm not out there hurting people. And so we have to know that that kind of pain comes from hurt.
Yeah. Well, the empathy that you have, I admire. Many of you are out there listening or watching this podcast on YouTube, and you know someone who's been through a lot of sexual trauma. And Dr. Simm, everything she's saying is like, that's me, that's me. Please listen to this. Reach out to Janet Boynes Ministries. If you know someone who has been through sexual trauma, whether it's male or female, send them this podcast, send them this YouTube clip so they can listen to it. So hopefully, they'll reach out to me or Dr. Simm, and God could use us to help get them free. Dr. Simm, we're going to have to come to a close, but before we do, I know you are a mentor and you're part of an organization called Alive at Last. Will you talk about this organization and how, one, it's helped you, but also is helping many other women?
Well, I started my undergrad in psychology. I thought I was going to be a counselor because I had a great one. Linda is still part of my life, but God had a different path for me. School had always been my safe haven, and I loved everything about school. And so I became a college professor. But when we moved, I stopped teaching and began. I wrote my book, and the day came, and that led to ministry work. And in doing that, I found an organization, or I better, truthfully, they found me. I was working as a private mentor, and so a life mentor. I have all of the school background and all of the clinical hours to be a licensed therapist, but my friend Linda, who is my mentor for life, she and I talked about it, and it was best for me not to get my license. And people would say, well, why not? Because a mentor is very different than a licensed therapist or counselor. They're very regulated by what they can and cannot say. I am a people person. I worked with a lot of individuals as my 15 years as a college professor, and was able to hear about their life and share mine and connect in them in a way that wasn't clinical. And so I decided to become a life mentor. And then, one thing led to another, and now I have a thriving private practice. I shared that with somebody, and the next thing you know, Gwen Miller, executive director of Alive at Last, reached out to me and said, would you consider being the director of mentorship? We have women in shelters throughout our area in Dallas that are dealing with sexual trauma, but we need volunteers to walk alongside them in their healing journey. Again, they have therapists, they have caseworkers, they have all of these things, but what they need is a mentor. A lot of people may not know exactly what a mentor it is, but think of it as like best friend with knowledge and experience, a wise person, a sage, if you will, that comes alongside and is able to walk with you, not do it for you, but walk with you as you do it, encouraging you, brainstorming with you, etc. And so I joined Alive at Last as their director of mentorship. So volunteers come into Alive at Last and they go through training, background checks, obviously, and things like that. But then we connect them with a woman in shelter that they're still on their road. Hurt is hurt. Your greatest hurt is the same as somebody else's greatest hurt. And we all know what a hurting heart feels like. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a woman who has sexual trauma to be a mentor. In fact, we have quite a few that don't, but they have other types of traumas that they know what a hurting person is. We just want to feel as if we're seen, as if we're heard, as if we're cared about. And that's what mentorship is. And so Alive at Last does that. And I get to literally do my college professor teaching education, but now I do it for volunteers so that they can help other women that are dealing with sexual trauma, and come out, hopefully healing. We have a really great success rate. We have about 82% of women that go through the Alive at Last program do not go back into shelter, do not go back into trafficking or prostitution. So it's a really great program, and I am just honored to be part of it, helping other volunteers be trained to help other women. Because I think that's the biggest thing. It is being involved in Alive at Last is helping women who want to help other women, and it's like there's so many of us out there that have been through stuff that just want to go and give of themselves. And it's just a great opportunity to work with the women.
Boy, what you're doing is really needed because it's really hard for me when I see women tearing down other women, knowing, what we go through in life. And I'm not saying men don't, but when you think about, all the sexual abuse and getting beat up and just the trauma I think a lot of women are enduring, it's sad. And I know it's not God's design for us to go through what we're going through. But you have a book. Tell us about your book.
Well, And the Day Came is an inspirational memoir. And it is basically my story of not only the walk of trauma to healing, but also of unconditional love. And that started with Jesus Christ. And it started with his enveloping me into his family of children of God, and how it affected my husband and my marriage. Like I said, I've broken every commandment, and was spiraling on the precipice of destroying my marriage, and hurting my own daughters due to my unhealthy life, and my depression. It was eating me alive. And so it really talks about that. It talks about sharing the story with my daughters as I'm writing it. It talks about reaching out to my parents and talking to them. So it's really a journey of unconditional love and restoration. And it was then turned into a documentary, award-winning documentary. I'm really excited about that. It won 3 awards for Best Documentary and Best Healing and Forgiveness Movie, which was really great. With the documentary covers a totally different aspect of it. It's called Tear Stained Forgiveness, and it's from healing from sexual trauma. It can be found on 24 Flick, which is a family-friendly streaming service.
Is it on YouTube?
No, I don't believe so. No, it's only on 24 Flick.
Do you have a link you can send me?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll send you the QR code and all of that jazz. But anyway, the documentary, it has my dad in it. It has my mom in it. It has my brother in it, my daughters in it, my sisters in it, my therapist / godmother, Linda, in it. And we all talk about this journey and our different perspectives of what was going on. And it ends with, healing and restoration in such a way that is clear what God can do. Again, like you were saying, I wanted to make sure, as I do at the end of the film, that this is my story of restoration. Not everybody is going to be able to have that kind of restorative relationship with the person that abused them, and that is okay. That's what God has done in my life. But it doesn't mean that you can't have forgiveness and you can't receive God's love no matter where you are in your journey. And I think that is very important. You are loved, you are treasured, you are important. And if nobody believes you, God believes you. So keep out there, keep asking, keep searching for healing, because God is right there with you. He's the greatest mentor ever. He is the Abba Father that is going to walk with you through absolutely everything and never forsake you and never leave you. So I ask you to, reach out to Janet and her ministry, reach out to me if you can. But it is possible to have forgiveness. And I love signing. There is joy in forgiveness, something that, people don't understand. That joy is what God wants to give you, and forgiveness is.
So if somebody wanted to reach out to you, what's the name of your practice and what is your email address if you're open to giving that out?
I am. My practice is drlynnette.com. And it's just important that you spell Lynnette right. So it's DRLYNNETTE.com. You can reach me there. Or if you want to email me directly, it is drlms96@gmail.com. And I'm more than willing. I do have some spaces in my private practice that are still available, although space is limited. Dealing with sexual trauma, it's not a small group. It's a very large and prolific group of women, of survivors. And unfortunately, we're not going to end sexual trauma, but what we can do is heal quicker and love on one another as we all journey through this world that we live in.
Dr. Lynnette, it's been an honor to have you on Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes. Those of you that are listening, please pass this YouTube video on to others and this podcast. God bless you, and thank you for being on our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Healing and Made Free with Janet Boynes. Acts 10:34 says, God is no respecter of persons. God doesn't play favorites, which means what He has done for Janet, what He has done for guests on this show, He will do for you too. If you are struggling with anything, do not hesitate to reach out to Janet Boynes Ministries. They will do their best to help you any way they can. Go to the website, janetboynesministries.com. Janet loves you, and most importantly, God loves you. Have a blessed day.